Welcome to week 13. During this week, we will be covering chapter 7, so we're kind of going back a little bit in order. In chapter 7, it covers cognition, which is everything from how we think to the discussion of intelligence and intelligence testing, as well as language, how we form language and what its purposes are for. So again, here is your to-do list. Here are the objectives for the chapter. The first part of the chapter covers cognition, which we talked a little bit about cognition in social psych, in the social psych chapter. But this kind of goes into how we represent things mentally when we see our world, how we form concepts, and how that then informs our thinking, and then leads to obviously how people problem solve and how people make decisions. It'll also talk a little bit about some biases in thinking, which sometimes are referred to as barriers to problem solving. And then there's some interesting discussion as well on the use of creativity. There's been a lot of research recently in the area of what's called divergent thinking that's kind of outside the box. What makes for that kind of thinking? Why don't we see more of that happening? So some interesting discussion there. That kind of concludes the part on cognition, points 1 through 4 here. And then it gets into intelligence. What is intelligence? How do we define it? What does it look like from person to person, which then gets into the assessing and measuring of intelligence, or i.e. IQ testing, which you all are probably more aware of. But in talking about IQ testing, it brings up a lot of questions as to the validity and the reliability of IQ tests. Like, are they measuring what they're supposed to be measuring? If I get a score for my intelligence, what exactly does that mean relative to the rest of the population? And how do I know what to do with that? So all of that's covered there, as well as any intellectual disabilities, which we've typically referred to as mental retardation. We try to stay away from that terminology now, and we see it more as disability. As well, on the other end of the spectrum, giftedness. When somebody has a very high IQ, what does that mean? How do their brains operate or function maybe differently than the norm? And then there's some discussion also on emotional intelligence, which is also a very popular and relevant area in terms of being very different from your normal everyday type of intelligence. Now, if you look down below, I'm just going to diverge for a minute to our discussion. The Hawk reading deals with the idea of multiple intelligences. This might be touched on just a tad. In fact, I think it is in the chapter. But this article reading, which the original study was done by Gardner, delves more into this idea that can we have even just one general IQ? Or is it more that we see IQ represented in different ways, in different facets, depending upon what career you go into and what that might look like? So the reading deals a little bit more with multiple intelligences. So I would take a look at that kind of as you're reading along with the section on intelligence in the chapter. And then it goes into talking a little bit about heredity and the environment and the role that plays on intelligence as well. So up to point 8 covers intelligence, points 5 through 8. And then as we get here down to 7.9, we see language, the discussion about language starting. So how do we use language? What are its different elements and structure? So it really gets into linguistics and psycholinguistics here, but you're not going to spend a ton of time. It's only a few pages of discussion, but mostly trying to gauge how does language affect how people think about their world and identify things in their world. So what you're going to be doing is looking at some of the research on communication and the use of language. And actually, we've come a long way just from studying animals and how animals communicate with one another and use language. It's given us a lot of feedback on how to look at our own processing of language. And then lastly, which I love about this chapter, it discusses methods for improving your thinking. So different strategies and tips on how to do that. Your lecture slides are here. And then the videos this week are actually in 2 different episodes. So you've got videos in episode 10, which is the cognition and language part, and then videos in episode 11, which is on intelligence. And you want to make sure to watch the videos in both of these episodes before doing the discussion question this week, because it's going to help shed some light on the concepts a little bit further before you dive into this idea of multiple intelligences. So again, this week, just want to make sure that everyone, when you're responding to the discussion question, that you're fully reading through each question. Make sure that you're answering what the question is asking. I noticed in the last round of discussions, a lot of people didn't actually answer the question, but kind of in a roundabout fashion talked about related topics, but didn't really get to the core of what the question was asking. So make sure, what is meant by the theory of multiple intelligences? What does this idea mean when someone says we have multiple intelligences? How did it come about? This should be more than a one-sentence answer. And then Gardner is the one who's responsible for studying this area of multiple intelligences and proposing the idea. What's his basis for doing that? Like, how does he define intelligence compared to some of the others? You're going to be learning about other theories behind IQ, Sternberg, and some other people who are intent on recognizing what intelligence means. Some of the originators of the IQ test, Spearman, you'll take a look at him. So how does Gardner fit into the picture, sort of when compared to traditional definitions of intelligence? He comes up with 8 categories. So you're asked to define what those 8 are and give an example of someone who fits into each category. I would love it if you could come up with your own. So the text does mention some. I would like to see you coming up with others. Use the text as a starting point to get an idea of who fits each type, and then try to come up with your own. And then lastly, not everyone embraces the idea of multiple intelligence. A lot of people are very stuck on the idea of a central intelligence or one way of measuring overall intelligence. So what are some of the criticisms for the theory that Gardner had, and what do you feel about that? So one part is mentioning the research on what the criticisms are, and the other part is talking about, what do you think about that? And does it fit with or jive with our understanding of how we assess intelligence overall? So once you finish the discussion, then you can take the quiz. The quiz is due again by Friday, 11:59 p.m., and it's just on chapter 7. So that pretty much sums up the week. Please let me know if you have any questions. Again, I can't stress enough to be watching the videos before you do your discussion. I'm noticing that people aren't really doing that. It's clear because a lot of times the videos will dive deeper into a topic and explain things, and if you haven't seen them, you're missing important details. And I can usually tell in the discussion posts, based on what's said, if you have or haven't got those details down. So just make sure to do that this week, and that should help a lot in terms of just giving more weight to your discussion posts. Okay, that is it. Please let me know if you have any questions, and have a good week.